Sometimes the measure of a man isn't found in what others think of him, but in what he does when no one's watching. In the frontier town of Copper Creek, Eli Turner learned this truth the hard way. When he stopped to help a well-dressed woman who'd slipped in the muddy street, the whole town laughed at him. They called him a fool for helping a stranger, especially one who looked too fine for prairie life. But Eli didn't listen. He offered his hand, helped her up, and gave her his coat. The woman, Clara Weston, thanked him and disappeared into the livery stable. By sundown, the sheriff posted a deed at the town hall. Clara Weston had just bought every acre of land east of the river. Now the same folks who mocked Eli are lining up to meet her. But who does Clara ask for? What happens when kindness becomes the one thing money can't buy? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Copper Creek sat in a valley where the mountains met the plains, a town born from the promise of gold and sustained by the stubbornness of those who stayed after the promise faded. By 1882, it had settled into itself. 200 souls give or take, a main street of false-fronted buildings that tried to look more substantial than they were, and enough whiskey and gossip to keep folks entertained through the long winters. The town had its rhythms. Sunday mornings belonged to the church bell and Reverend Walsh's sermons about temperance that nobody took too seriously. Afternoons belonged to front porches and the careful exchange of information that passed for conversation. Evenings belonged to Sal Murphy's saloon, where men gathered to complain about weather, wives, and the government, usually in that order. Eli Turner came to town once a month, and his arrival marked time as surely as the phases of the moon. The first Tuesday after the new moon, regular as clockwork, his wagon would appear at the north end of Main Street. He'd spend 3 hours in town, no more, no less, and then he'd disappear back into the mountains where he kept a cabin nobody had ever seen. He was 42 years old, though the sun and wind had carved lines in his face that made him look both older and timeless. His hair, dark brown shot through with grey, hung past his collar. He kept a neat beard, more out of practicality than fashion. His eyes were the colour of river stones, grey-green and steady. When he looked at you, it felt like he was seeing past whatever face you wore in public to something truer underneath. Most folks found it unsettling. Eli Turner was a mountain man in an age when mountain men were becoming relics. He trapped beaver and marten, hunted elk and deer, and sold the pelts to a trader who came through twice a year. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough. He lived simply, wanted little, and bothered nobody. In return, he asked only to be left alone. The town obliged mostly. They'd nod to him at the general store, take his money at the saloon if he stopped for a single whiskey, and then forget about him until the next month. He was a curiosity, nothing more, the strange man who chose solitude over society, isolation over intimacy. Only a few people in Copper Creek knew anything real about Eli Turner. Mrs. Henley, who ran the general store, knew he'd been married once. She'd seen the way his eyes went distant when young couples came in to buy supplies for their new homes. She'd learned not to ask questions, just to pack his flour and coffee and beans with a maternal efficiency that said more than words could. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw knew Eli had come from back east 8 years ago, arriving with a wagon, a good horse, and grief so thick you could almost see it hanging around him like fog. Tom had been deputy then, and he'd watched Eli build that cabin up in the high country, working from dawn to dusk like a man trying to outrun his own thoughts. Tom respected that. He'd lost his own father to drink and knew that everyone carried something. Sal Murphy, who owned the saloon and had a gift for reading people that came from 30 years of serving liquor, knew that Eli Turner had been something different before he came west. The way he carried himself, the educated way he sometimes spoke when he forgot to keep it simple, these things told Sal that Eli had left behind more than just geography. But none of them knew the whole story, and Eli preferred it that way. On this particular Tuesday in late September, Eli drove his wagon into Copper Creek under a sky that couldn't decide between sunshine and storm. The air had that electric feeling that comes before rain, and the wind carried the smell of moisture from the mountains. He'd need to finish his business and get home before the weather turned. He tied his horse outside Henley's general store and stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed, and Mrs. Henley looked up from her ledger with a smile that creased her round face into a map of laugh lines. "Mr. Turner," she said warmly, "right on schedule. I've got your order ready." "Appreciate it, ma'am," Eli said, removing his hat. His mother had raised him with manners, and some habits died hard. Mrs. Henley bustled around the counter, her grey hair pinned in a no-nonsense bun, her capable hands pulling items from shelves with practiced efficiency. "Got some nice apples in from the Henderson orchard. Thought you might like a few. Good for keeping through winter." "That's kind of you." She paused, studying him with the frankness of a woman who'd raised 6 children and buried 3. "You look tired, Eli. You sleeping all right up there?" "Well enough." She didn't believe him, but she let it go. "There's talk about Eastern money coming to the valley. Investors looking at the land. Folks are nervous." Eli nodded. He'd heard rumors. The railroad was pushing west, bringing capital and ambition in its wake. Men with more money than sense were buying up property, dreaming of cattle empires. It was the way of things. Progress, they called it, though Eli had never been sure that word meant what people thought it meant. "Change is coming whether we want it or not, Mrs. Henley said, wrapping his supplies in brown paper. "Question is what kind of change. Sometimes I think the old ways had more room for human decency." It was an unusual statement from her, and Eli glanced up. Mrs. Henley was looking past him, out, the window to the street, where a small crowd had gathered near the stage depot. "Stage must be in," she said. "Always draws a crowd, people hoping for news from the wider world." Eli paid for his supplies, loaded them into his wagon, and was preparing to leave when he heard the laughter. It was the particular kind of laughter that comes at someone else's expense, sharp, mean, delighted by another's misfortune. He looked down Main Street to where the crowd had gathered. The afternoon stage had indeed arrived, and passengers were disembarking. Most of them were the usual types, traveling salesmen, miners heading to new claims, a family that looked road-weary and hopeful in equal measure. But one passenger stood out. She was a woman, perhaps 35, dressed in clothes that spoke of eastern cities. A traveling suit of deep blue wool, well made but practical, and a hat that had probably been fashionable in Denver or St. Louis. She carried herself with a straight-backed confidence that seemed at odds with her current situation. She was standing in the middle of Main Street, which after last night's rain was a river of mud, looking at her mud-caked boots and hem with an expression of dismay. And the town was laughing. Young men loitering outside the saloon were nudging each other and grinning. A group of women outside the millinery shop whispered behind their hands, their faces showing that particular satisfaction some people take in watching the refined brought low. Even Sheriff Bradshaw, standing on the boardwalk, was smiling, not unkindly, but not offering help either. The woman tried to take a step, and her boot nearly came off in the sucking mud. Someone in the crowd whistled mockingly. Someone else called out, "Welcome to Montana, lady." More laughter. The woman's face flushed, but she kept her chin up. She was, Eli noticed, trying to maintain her dignity in an undignified situation. There was something admirable in that. Nobody moved to help her. Eli felt something old and familiar stir in his chest. Anger at cruelty, at the casual way people could delight in another's struggle. He thought of his wife Anne, how she'd always been the first to help, how she'd believed that kindness was a choice you made every day, especially when it wasn't convenient. He thought of how alone this woman looked, standing in the mud while strangers laughed. He thought of all the times in the past 8 years when he'd chosen not to get involved, to keep his distance, to protect himself from feeling anything at all. And then, before he could talk himself out of it, Eli Turner climbed down from his wagon and walked toward the woman in the muddy street. The laughter died as people noticed him. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. In a town where Eli was known for keeping to himself, this was remarkable enough to draw attention. He walked straight to the woman, his boots sinking into the mud with each step, and stopped in front of her. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "let me help you." Up close, he could see her eyes, intelligent, proud, and at this moment grateful. They were brown with flecks of gold, like autumn leaves caught in sunlight. "Thank you," she said simply. He offered his hand, and she took it. Her grip was firm, not the delicate touch he'd expected. He helped her find solid footing, then shrugged out of his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You're shivering," he said. Behind them, the laughter had turned to something else, disbelief perhaps, or the ugly sound of people embarrassed by someone else's decency. "She probably don't even have 2 coins to rub together," someone called out. "Don't waste your time, Turner. Looks like a city woman who bit off more than she can chew." Eli ignored them. He guided the woman to the boardwalk where she could stand on solid ground. "I appreciate your kindness," she said, her voice carrying a hint of something: accent, education, a life lived far from here. "I'm looking for the livery stable, 2 buildings down," Eli said, pointing. "Tell Sam I sent you." "He's honest," she smiled, and it transformed her face from merely handsome to something approaching beautiful. "And what's your name, so I can tell him?" "Eli Turner." "Clara Weston," she said, extending her hand again. They shook, a formal gesture that felt oddly weighted with significance. "Are you here visiting family, Miss Weston?" "Mrs.," she corrected gently, though Eli saw no ring. "And no, I'm here to look at property." That raised eyebrows among those close enough to hear. A woman looking at property, alone. "Good luck to you, then," Eli said. He tipped his hat and turned to go. "Mr. Turner," she called after him. He paused. "Thank you, truly." He nodded and walked back to his wagon, acutely aware of every eye on him. As he climbed up and took the reins, he could hear the whispers starting, the speculation, the judgment. Always knew Turner was touched in the head, probably thinks she'll warm his bed for it. City woman won't last a week out here. Eli drove out of town without looking back, but he couldn't shake the image of Clara Weston's face, the strength in it, the intelligence. The brief glimpse of vulnerability when she'd thanked him. The storm broke as he reached the foothills, rain coming down in sheets that turned the world grey and distant. Eli let it wash over him, welcoming the cold. He'd done the right thing, he told himself. His mother would have been proud. Anne would have been proud, but as he drove home through the rain, Eli Turner couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that in helping a stranger in a muddy street, he'd set something in motion that couldn't be undone. Behind him, in Copper Creek, that feeling was shared by nearly everyone who'd witnessed what happened. By evening, every soul in town would know the story. By morning, it would be embellished beyond recognition, but none of them, not Eli, not Clara, not the gossips at the saloon, could have imagined what would happen next. That evening, Sal Murphy's saloon was more crowded than usual for a Tuesday. Word had spread about the incident in the street, and folks were eager to dissect it over whiskey and beer. The story had already grown in the telling. Some said the woman had been sobbing in the mud. Others claimed Eli had carried her bodily to the boardwalk, like some kind of hero from a dime novel. The truth, as usual, was less dramatic but more interesting. "I'm telling you," said Marcus Dalton, a local rancher with more ambition than acreage. "That woman is trouble. You don't come to Montana territory dressed like that unless you're running from something or looking for something you got no business looking for." Dalton was a hard man in his 50s, with a face weathered by sun and suspicion. He owned 3,000 acres south of town and considered himself the biggest operator in the valley. He didn't like outsiders, didn't like change, and especially didn't like the idea of Eastern money nosing around what he considered his domain. "Maybe she's just passing through," offered Tommy Henderson, a young cowhand who worked for Dalton and knew better than to contradict him too directly. "Women like that don't just pass through, boy. They're either chasing a man or chasing money. Mark my words." Sheriff Tom Bradshaw sat at his usual corner table, nursing a beer and listening. He'd learned long ago that a lawman heard more by staying quiet than by asking questions. People told you what they wanted you to know. What they didn't want you to know often came out when they'd had a few drinks and forgotten to guard their tongues. Tom had been thinking about the woman all afternoon. Something about her didn't fit the usual patterns. She'd been poised, self-possessed despite her circumstances. The way she'd thanked Eli had been genuine, not the simpering gratitude of someone looking for advantage. And there'd been intelligence in her eyes, the kind that saw through pretense. But what puzzled Tom most was why she'd asked about the livery stable. If she was just passing through, she'd have asked about the hotel. If she was looking for work, she'd have asked about opportunities. The livery stable meant she was interested in horses, transportation, or... His thoughts were interrupted by the saloon doors swinging open. Deputy Frank Morrison stepped inside, his face flushed with excitement. Frank was 23 and still got excited about things. Tom sometimes envied him that, Sheriff, Frank said, slightly breathless. You need to come to the office. Got a telegram from Denver. The conversations in the saloon didn't stop, but they got quieter. Telegrams meant news, and news meant something to talk about. Tom stood, dropped a coin on the table, and followed Frank outside. The rain had stopped, leaving the air clean and cold. Stars were beginning to appear in breaks between the clouds. In the sheriff's office, Frank handed him the telegram, with the reverence usually reserved for important documents. Tom held it to the lamplight and read. His eyebrows rose. He read it again, slower this time, making sure he understood correctly. Well, he said quietly. Well, what is it? Frank asked, unable to contain his curiosity. Tom looked at his deputy, then at the telegram, then back at Frank. Go find Mrs. Henley. Ask her to come to the office. Don't tell anyone else about this. Understand? Yes, sir, but now, Frank. The deputy left and Tom sat at his desk, the telegram in front of him. He read it a third time, and with each reading, the implications grew larger. The telegram was from the Territorial Land Office in Denver. It informed him, as a courtesy to local law enforcement, that a significant property transaction had been completed. The Weston Cattle Company, represented by Clara Weston of Philadelphia, had purchased 15,000 acres of prime grazing land east of the river, land that included water rights, mineral rights, and timber rights. The purchase price was listed. Tom had to count the zeros twice to make sure he wasn't seeing things. Clara Weston wasn't running from anything. She wasn't looking for work. She wasn't some down on her luck woman hoping to snag a husband on the frontier. Clara Weston was quite possibly the richest person who'd ever set foot in Copper Creek. Mrs. Henley arrived 20 minutes later, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. Tom showed her the telegram without preamble. She read it, her lips moving slightly. Then she sat down heavily in the chair across from his desk. She said. My goodness. That land, Tom said. That's the Henderson parcel, the old Strickland place. And the eastern section that Dalton's been trying to buy for 2 years. I know. Mrs. Henley's mind was working fast. You didn't run a successful business in a frontier town without being sharp. That means she's been planning this. Those parcels were held by 3 different owners. Someone would have had to negotiate with all of them, coordinate the deals, handle the legal work. That's not something you do on a whim. No, Tom agreed. It's not. They sat in silence for a moment, both considering what this meant. She'll need to file the deed at the county office, Mrs. Henley said. Make it official. I imagine she'll do that tomorrow. Tom tapped the telegram. The question is, why here? Philadelphia to Montana Territory is a long way to come for cattle ranching. There's good land closer to civilization. Maybe that's exactly why, Mrs. Henley said thoughtfully. Maybe she wanted to be far from civilization, from whatever she left behind. Maybe. Tom remembered Clara's face in the muddy street, proud, composed, dealing with mockery with quiet dignity. Or maybe she's running towards something instead of away. Either way, Mrs. Henley said, standing up, this town is about to change. That much money, that much land, it'll bring jobs, opportunity. But it'll also bring envy and trouble. She looked at Tom meaningfully. You'll have your hands full. After she left, Tom sat alone in his office, thinking. He thought about Eli Turner, who'd helped a stranger without knowing who she was, who'd given his coat to a woman he thought was just another traveler down on her luck, who'd walked away from the mockery without defending himself or expecting anything in return. Tom wondered if Eli had any idea what he'd done, how his simple act of kindness might ripple outward in ways none of them could predict. Probably not, Tom decided. Eli wasn't the type to calculate consequences. He'd helped because it was the right thing to do. Simple as that. Tom looked at the telegram one more time, then locked it in his desk drawer. Tomorrow would be soon enough for the town to know. Tonight let them speculate and gossip. It would make the revelation all the more dramatic. He allowed himself a small smile. In 30 years of law enforcement, he'd seen a lot of things, but he'd never seen anything quite like this. Meanwhile, up in the mountains, Eli Turner sat in his cabin, unaware of the telegram, unaware of the magnitude of what was coming. He'd built a fire against the evening chill and was preparing a simple dinner, venison stew, biscuits, coffee strong enough to strip paint. The cabin was small but well made, with tight corners and a stone chimney that drew properly. Eli had built it himself, every log and nail, during those first desperate months after arriving in Montana. He'd needed something to do with his hands, something to exhaust him enough that he could sleep without dreaming. It had worked mostly. The cabin had one room that served as kitchen, living area, and bedroom, a table and 2 chairs, though he'd never had a guest to occupy the second chair, a narrow bed with quilts his mother had made decades ago, shelves lined with books. Eli might live like a hermit, but he'd been educated back east, and he still read whenever he could. On the small mantel above the fireplace sat a daguerreotype in a simple wooden frame. A young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, wearing a dress with a high collar, not quite smiling but with warmth in her expression. And Eli looked at the photograph as he did every evening, a ritual he couldn't break and wasn't sure he wanted to. 8 years, and the grief had mellowed from sharp pain to a dull ache, present but bearable. Most days, today had been different. Helping Clara Weston in the street had awakened something he'd thought long dead, the impulse to connect, to care, to involve himself in another person's life, even briefly. It had felt good and terrifying in equal measure. He wondered about her, where she'd come from, what had brought her to Copper Creek, whether she'd find what she was looking for. He wondered if he'd see her again, and was surprised to find himself hoping he would. Then he felt guilty for hoping it. "I'm sorry," he said quietly to Anne's photograph. "I'm not trying to forget you. I never will." The photograph, of course, didn't answer. But in the flickering firelight, Anne's eyes seemed understanding, forgiving. Eli ate his dinner alone, as he had for 8 years. He read a chapter of Dickens by lamplight. He banked the fire and went to bed. Outside, an owl called, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled at the emerging stars. He lay in the darkness, thinking about muddy streets and brown eyes flecked with gold, about kindness and consequence, about the strange way life could surprise you when you'd stopped expecting surprises. And as he drifted toward sleep, Eli Turner had no idea that tomorrow morning everything would change. In Copper Creek, the night passed with unusual quiet. Those who'd witnessed the incident in the street told their spouses and children about it over dinner. Speculations were made, theories proposed. Most people concluded that the woman would be gone by morning, frightened off by frontier life and Montana mud. Marcus Dalton went home to his ranch house and poured himself a large whiskey, troubled by thoughts he couldn't quite articulate. Eastern money meant competition. It meant change. It meant his comfortable position at the top of the valley's hierarchy might be challenged. He didn't like it one bit. Mrs. Henley prayed before bed, as she did every night, and added a special request that whatever was coming would be guided by wisdom and grace. She had a feeling, the kind that came from living 62 years and seeing human nature in all its variations, that Copper Creek was about to learn some important lessons. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw made his evening rounds, checking doors, nodding to the few people still out. He stopped outside the hotel and looked up at the second-floor windows. One room showed lamplight, Clara Weston presumably preparing for bed, or perhaps writing letters by the light. Tomorrow he'd have to post the deed notice publicly. It was required by law, and when he did, the whole town would know. Tom found himself looking forward to it with an anticipation that surprised him. Maybe he was getting old, or maybe he just enjoyed watching pompous people get their assumptions challenged. Either way, tomorrow would be interesting. Very interesting indeed. The lamp in Clara Weston's room burned late into the night. If anyone had been able to see inside, they would have found her at the small desk, writing in a leather-bound journal by candlelight. She wrote about the journey west, about leaving Philadelphia and all its memories behind. She wrote about her father, dead 6 months now, and how his loss had freed her to finally pursue dreams she'd kept hidden. She wrote about the land she'd purchased, sight unseen except for survey reports and photographs, and her plans for building something that would last. And she wrote, briefly, about a man with riverstone eyes who'd helped her in the street when no one else would. He didn't know who I was, she wrote in her careful script. He helped me because it was right, not because he wanted something from me. In Philadelphia, I learned to distrust kindness because it always came with a price. Here, perhaps, things are different. Here, perhaps, character still matters more than position. She closed the journal, extinguished the candle, and went to bed. Tomorrow, she'd file the deed. Tomorrow, she'd begin the work of building her ranch, her future, her new life. Tomorrow, everything would begin in the deep watches of the night. When Copper Creek slept and dreamed its small-town dreams, the future was arriving on silent feet, unannounced and unstoppable, and at the center of it all, connected by one muddy moment of kindness, 2 people slept, Eli in his mountain cabin, Clara in her hotel room, neither knowing that their lives had already become entangled in ways that would transform them both. Morning came to Copper Creek with the particular clarity that follows rain. The streets had dried enough to be passable, though mud still clung to wagon wheels and boot heels. The air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke, and the mountains stood sharp against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw stood outside the town hall at 8 o'clock sharp, a document in his hand, and a small crowd already gathering. Word had spread somehow, it always did in small towns, that something important was about to be announced. He waited until a respectable number had assembled, then pinned the document to the public notice board with 3 precise tacks. The crowd surged forward to read it. Tom stepped back and watched faces change as they absorbed the words. Shock first, then disbelief, then a scrambling reassessment of everything they thought they knew. 15,000 acres, someone breathed. That's the Henderson place. The old Strickland Ranch, everything east to the county line, Western Cattle Company. That's the woman from yesterday. Has to be. How much did she pay? Someone had found the purchase price. A low whistle echoed through the crowd. That can't be right. Nobody has that kind of money. She does, apparently. Tom watched Marcus Dalton's face turn red, then white, then red again. Dalton had been trying to buy the Henderson parcel for 2 years, and the Strickland place before that. He'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd dismissed as a foolish city woman less than 24 hours ago. "This is a mistake," Dalton said, his voice tight. "It has to be. Some clerical error?" "No error," Tom said mildly. "I confirmed it with the territorial office myself last night. The transaction is legal and complete. Mrs. Weston filed all proper paperwork, paid in full, holds clear title to every acre." The crowd erupted in speculation. Questions flew like startled birds. Where did the money come from? What were her intentions? Would she actually run cattle, or was this some Eastern investment scheme? Would she hire locally or bring in her own people? Tom let them talk. People needed to process shock, and talking was how they did it. Across the street, Mrs. Henley watched from her store window. She saw the faces, heard the rising voices, and shook her head. Human nature was predictable. Yesterday, they'd mocked Clara Weston. Today, they'd resent her. Tomorrow, they'd try to profit from her. The question was what Clara would do about it. That question was answered at 9 o'clock when Clara herself appeared on Main Street, emerging from the hotel with the leather portfolio under her arm. She was dressed for business. A sensible dark skirt, white blouse with a simple brooch at the collar, her hair pinned up in a no-nonsense style. She looked every inch the woman who'd just purchased 15,000 acres of Montana territory. She also looked like she'd slept well and had no intention of being intimidated by anyone. The crowd parted as she approached, conversations dying mid-sentence. Clara walked directly to the notice board, read the document Tom had posted, and nodded with satisfaction. "Good morning, Sheriff," she said pleasantly. "Thank you for posting this so promptly." "Just doing my duty, ma'am." Clara turned to face the assembled crowd. She didn't smile, but her expression was open, direct. "I imagine you have questions. I'm happy to answer them within reason." For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Marcus Dalton found his voice. "What do you want with all that land?" His tone was aggressive, challenging. "What's your game?" Clara looked at him with mild interest. "I want to build a ranch, run cattle, perhaps some horses eventually." "That's not a game, Mr. Dalton." "Marcus Dalton. I own the Double D Ranch south of here. Pleased to meet you, Mr. Dalton." Her tone suggested she was anything but pleased. "I hope we can be good neighbors. That land should have been mine," Dalton said bluntly. "I was negotiating for the Henderson place." "Perhaps you should have negotiated faster." Clara's voice remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "The sellers were eager to close. I made them a fair offer, and they accepted." "That's business, Mr. Dalton," someone in the crowd snickered. Dalton's face darkened. Before he could respond, Clara continued, addressing the entire assembly. "I'm here to build something lasting. That means I'll need workers, ranch hands, carpenters, perhaps a cook and housekeeper. I pay fair wages on time, and I judge people by their work, not their pedigree or who they know." That got attention. Fair wages and reliable pay were rare enough on the frontier to be noteworthy. "I'll be respectful of existing water rights and grazing traditions," Clara went on. "I have no intention of causing problems with my neighbors, but I also have no intention of being pushed around or taken advantage of. I hope that's clear." It was very clear. "Now," Clara said, "I need to visit several local businesses. I'll need lumber, hardware, and various supplies. I hope Copper Creek is prepared to benefit from this arrangement." "Because I certainly am." She walked away, heading toward Mrs. Henley's store, leaving behind a crowd buzzing with reaction. "Well," someone said, "she's got nerve, I'll give her that." "Nerve don't run a ranch," Dalton growled. "She'll fall flat on her face by spring, and that land will go back on the market. Then we'll see who gets it." But his voice lacked conviction, and several people noticed Mrs. Henley was waiting when Clara entered the general store. The two women regarded each other for a moment, sizing each other up with the particular shrewdness of women who'd learned to navigate a man's world. "Mrs. Weston," Mrs. Henley said, "welcome to Copper Creek properly this time. Thank you. And thank you for not laughing yesterday. I was raised better than that." Mrs. Henley gestured to her store. "What can I do for you?" "I need supplies, quite a lot of them. And I need recommendations for reliable workers. I can help with both." Mrs. Henley pulled out a ledger. "But first, tell me, are you serious about this, or is this some kind of Eastern lark? Because if you're serious, I'll help you. If you're not, I won't waste either of our time." Clara smiled, the first genuine smile Mrs. Henley had seen. "I'm serious. My father died 6 months ago. Left me more money than I know what to do with, and no obligations except to myself. I've always wanted to do this, build something with my own hands, my own vision. Montana seemed far enough away to be free, but close enough to civilization to be practical." Mrs. Henley nodded. "Your father, he was in railroads? You've heard of Robert Weston?" "I may live in Montana, young lady, but I can still read newspapers." "Yes, I've heard of him. Built half the rail lines in Pennsylvania. Made a fortune and was decent about it from what I read. Treated his workers fair." "He did," Clara said quietly. "He taught me that money is a tool, not a measure of worth, and that the people who work for you deserve respect and fair treatment. I intend to honor that." Mrs. Henley studied Clara for a long moment, then made a decision. "All right, then. Let's talk about what you need. They spent the next hour going over supplies, costs, and logistics. Mrs. Henley recommended workers, not the loudest or most connected, but the most reliable. She warned Clara about local politics, about who could be trusted and who couldn't, about the unwritten rules that governed frontier life. "There's one more thing," Mrs. Henley said as they finished. "Eli Turner, the man who helped you yesterday." "Yes?" Clara's attention sharpened. "He's a good man. Best kind there is, honest, decent, minds his own business. Town doesn't appreciate him because he won't play their games." Mrs. Henley looked at Clara directly. "Don't know what you're planning, but if you need someone you can trust, someone who won't try to cheat you or use you, Eli's your man." "I was hoping to speak with him," Clara admitted. "Do you know where I might find him?" "He's got a cabin up in the high country. Nobody knows exactly where. He values his privacy. But he comes to town first Tuesday of every month like clockwork. Won't be back for 4 weeks. 4 weeks, Clara repeated. It seemed like a long time, unless you send word you want to see him. Mrs. Henderson's boy knows the general area where Eli traps. He could carry a message. Clara considered this. She'd been thinking about Eli Turner since yesterday, wondering about him. Not romantically. She'd learned to be cautious about that after Philadelphia, but with genuine curiosity. A man who helped strangers without expectation of reward was rare enough to be noteworthy, and Mrs. Henley's recommendation carried weight. "I'd like to offer him a job," Clara said. "As foreman of my ranch." Mrs. Henley's eyebrows rose. "That's bold." "You barely know him. I know he helped me when no one else would. I know he expected nothing in return. In my experience, that tells you more about a person than a dozen letters of reference." "Can't argue with that," Mrs. Henley said. "But Eli's a solitary sort. He might not want the responsibility. Then he can say no," Clara said. "But I'd like to ask him." "Everyone deserves to be asked," Mrs. Henley smiled. "You'll do all right here, Mrs. Weston. You've got sense to go with your money." "That's rare." Clara left the store with a list of supplies on order and the promise that a message would be sent to Eli Turner. She spent the rest of the morning meeting with the local carpenter, the blacksmith, and the land surveyor. By afternoon, word had spread throughout Copper Creek. Clara Weston was serious, professional, and not to be trifled with. The town's attitude began to shift. Not to acceptance, not yet, but to a wary respect. Money talked, and Clara Weston had proven she had plenty of it. Only Marcus Dalton remained hostile, drinking alone in the saloon, muttering about Eastern investors and women who didn't know their place. Nobody paid him much attention. Dalton had always been bitter about something. This was just the latest excuse. As the sun set on Clara's second day in Copper Creek, the town settled into an uneasy new normal. Change had arrived, and there was no sending it back. Up in the mountains, Eli Turner was checking his trap lines, unaware that a message was coming, unaware that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine, unaware that helping a stranger in a muddy street had set in motion a chain of events that would transform everything. He thought he knew about himself, about love, about what it meant to be alive instead of merely existing. The future was coming for Eli Turner, whether he was ready or not. Eli arrived in Copper Creek mid-morning on a Friday, riding into town under a sky that promised autumn. The aspens in the high country had started turning gold, and there was a crispness to the air that spoke of coming winter. He tied his horse outside the hotel and stood for a moment, gathering himself. Through the window, he could see the lobby, respectable, modest, the kind of place that catered to traveling businessmen and the occasional well-heeled visitor. He pushed open the door. The clerk at the desk looked up, recognition flickering across his face. Everyone in Copper Creek knew Eli Turner by now, if not personally, then by reputation. The man who'd helped the rich woman. The man who might be more than he seemed. "Help you?" the clerk asked, politeness edged with curiosity. "I'm here to see Mrs. Weston. She's expecting me." "Room 12. Second floor." Eli climbed the stairs, his boots loud on the wooden steps. At room 12, he paused, then knocked. "Come in," Clara's voice called. He opened the door and stepped inside. Clara was seated at a desk by the window, papers spread before her, wearing reading glasses that made her look scholarly. She stood when she saw him, removing the glasses, and smiled. "Mr. Turner, thank you for coming." "Ma'am," he held his hat in both hands, suddenly feeling awkward. "I got your letter." "And?" She watched him with those intelligent eyes, waiting. "I'd like to accept your offer." "If it still stands," the smile widened. "It does. Please sit down. We have much to discuss." Over the next hour, they talked through the details. Clara had maps of the property spread across the desk. Survey reports, plans for where to build the main ranch house, the bunkhouse, the barns and corrals. "I've never run a cattle operation this size," Eli admitted. "I need to be honest about that. But you know the land," Clara said. "You know how to survive in this country, how to read weather and seasons. You understand animals and hard work. Those are the things I need. The specifics of cattle ranching we can learn together." "Together?" "I'm not one of those owners who sits in a parlor and lets others do the work," Clara said firmly. "This is my ranch. I intend to be involved in every aspect of it. I'll need your expertise and guidance, but I'll be working alongside you." Eli felt something relax in his chest. He'd been worried she'd expect him to manage everything while she remained distant and uninvolved. Partnership he could handle. Servitude he couldn't. "Then I think we'll do fine," he said. They shook hands on it, a firm grip that felt like sealing more than just a business arrangement. "Now," Clara said, pulling out another sheet of paper, "we need to hire a crew. I'll need your recommendations. Who in Copper Creek can we trust?" Eli thought carefully. "Not many, if I'm being honest. Most of the available men around here are available for a reason. They can't hold a job, or they drink too much, or they're lazy. The good ones are already working. What about the not-so-good ones who might become good with the right opportunity?" That was an interesting question. Eli considered it. "There's a Mexican vaquero named Miguel Santos," he said slowly. "Works odd jobs around town. He's skilled with horses. I've seen him ride. But folks don't hire him regular because of prejudice." Clara wrote down the name. "Who else?" "Joseph Blackfeather. He's stylish, lives outside town. Best tracker I've ever seen. Knows the land better than anyone. But most ranchers won't hire Indians. They're lost," Clara said crisply. "Anyone else?" "There's a young widow, Sarah Chen, Chinese. Her husband died in a mining accident last year. She needs work, and I've heard she's an excellent cook. But people are prejudiced against her too," Clara finished. She looked at Eli with approval. "You're recommending people who've been overlooked or rejected because of who they are, not what they can do. You said you judge people by their work, not their pedigree," Eli said. "Figured you meant it." "I did." "I do." Clara stood and walked to the window, looking out at Main Street. "My father taught me something important. The people most grateful for opportunity are often the ones who've been denied it. They work harder, stay loyal longer, and build something real because they know how rare that chance is." She turned back to Eli. "Let's hire them, all of them." "Anyone else?" Eli thought. "Could use a few general ranch hands. Young men willing to learn. There's Tommy Henderson, Billy's older brother. He's 19, works for Dalton now, but I hear he's unhappy there. Dalton treats his men poorly. Then let's offer him something better." Over the next week, Eli and Clara assembled their crew. Miguel Santos accepted immediately, his face showing disbelief that someone actually wanted to hire him for his skills. Joseph Blackfeather was more cautious, but Clara's direct manner and fair offer won him over. Sarah Chen wept when they offered her the cook position with a salary higher than she'd dared hope for. Tommy Henderson gave notice to Dalton and joined them, bringing 2 other young hands who'd also grown tired of the Double D's harsh conditions. The crew totaled 8 people, small for a ranch that size, but Eli believed in starting lean and building carefully. Better to have a few dedicated workers than a dozen unreliable ones. They gathered for the first time on a Monday morning at the site where the ranch house would be built. Clara had commissioned a detailed architectural plan, practical but handsome, a 2-story structure with room to grow. Eli looked at his new crew. They were an unlikely group, Mexican, Native American, Chinese, young white men who'd been working dead-end jobs. In most places, they'd never be allowed to work together. Here they were family. "Listen up," Eli said, his voice carrying across the group. "Mrs. Weston and I have one rule. We judge by work and character, not by anything else. You do your job well, treat each other with respect, and you'll have a place here. We're building something that'll last. Something we can be proud of, Miguel spoke up. Some folks in town won't like this. Us working together. They already talking. Let them talk, Clara said firmly. She stood beside Eli, and together they faced the crew. This is my land, my ranch. I decide who works here. Anyone who has a problem with that can take it up with me directly. The crew exchanged glances, and Eli saw something pass between them. Relief, gratitude, the beginning of loyalty. These were people who'd been told they weren't good enough, weren't wanted. Clara and Eli were telling them something different. All right then, Eli said. Let's get to work. They started with the basics, clearing the site, marking foundation lines, setting up a temporary camp. The work was hard, physical, and surprisingly joyful. The crew worked well together, their different skills complementing each other. Miguel taught Tommy better rope work. Joseph showed them all how to read animal tracks and weather signs. Sarah turned simple camp meals into something special, and through it all, Eli and Clara worked side by side. She wasn't afraid of physical labor. She hauled lumber, drove nails, got dirty and tired like everyone else. The crew noticed and respected it. So did the town. Copper Creek watched the ranch take shape with mixed feelings. Some people approved of the jobs being created. Others muttered about Clara's radical hiring practices. Marcus Dalton, having lost 3 of his best workers to better wages and treatment, spread rumors about impropriety, an unmarried woman and her foreman living in close quarters. The church ladies began to whisper. The saloon crowd made crude jokes. Sheriff Bradshaw heard it all and said nothing, but his eyes were watchful. Mrs. Henley defended Clara when she could, but even she had to admit the situation was unconventional. A single woman running a ranch, working alongside men, living in what was essentially a camp situation. It violated every social norm the frontier held dear. Let them talk, Clara said, when Eli mentioned the gossip one evening. They were sitting by the campfire after a long day, the crew having retired to their tents. I didn't come here to win a popularity contest. They could make things difficult, Eli warned. Turn public opinion against you. That matters in a place like this. Does it matter to you? Clara asked. The talk? The gossip about us? Eli met her eyes across the fire. No, I stopped caring what people thought of me a long time ago. Good, then we're in agreement. But as Eli lay in his tent that night, he couldn't help wondering if they were making a mistake. Not in the work, the ranch was coming along beautifully, but in how they were conducting themselves. Clara was right that they weren't doing anything improper, but appearances mattered in frontier society, especially for women, and despite himself, despite his determination to keep things professional and distant, Eli was starting to care about Clara Weston as more than just an employer. He cared about her laugh when Miguel told stories in Spanish. He cared about the way she insisted on doing her share of the work. He cared about her vision for the ranch, her fairness to the crew, her refusal to compromise her principles. He cared, and that terrified him, because caring meant being vulnerable again. Caring meant risk, and Eli Turner had already lost one woman he cared about. He wasn't sure he could survive losing another. October brought the first snow to the high peaks and a rhythm to the work at the ranch. The main house was taking shape, walls rising, roof beams going up, the promise of shelter before winter came in earnest. The bunkhouse was nearly finished, and the corrals were complete. Clara proved to be exactly what she'd claimed, a hands-on owner who learned quickly and worked tirelessly. She consulted with Eli on every major decision, but trusted his judgment on daily operations. They developed an easy partnership, finishing each other's sentences, anticipating needs without discussion. The crew noticed. So did the town. One evening, as the workday ended and the crew gathered for Sarah's excellent stew, Clara pulled Eli aside. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They walked away from camp, toward the creek that marked the eastern boundary of the property. The aspens were fully gold now, glowing in the last light. The air smelled of wood smoke and coming winter. For a while neither spoke. Then Clara said, "Tell me about your wife." Eli stopped walking. Why? Because you wear her memory like armor, Clara said gently. And I want to understand who she was. What you lost. Eli was silent for a long moment. Then slowly he began to talk. He told Clara about Anne, how they'd met at a church social in Ohio, how she'd laughed at his awkward attempts at conversation, how patient she'd been with his serious nature, how she'd made him feel like he could be more than just competent, could actually be happy. He told her about the fever that took Anne, how helpless he'd felt watching her fade, how the world had lost color and meaning after she died, how he'd come west not to start over but to hide, to exist without living. She wanted children, Eli said, his voice rough. We tried for 5 years. Never happened. She said it didn't matter, that we had each other, but I knew she was disappointed. And then she died before we could. He stopped, the old grief rising up sharp and fresh. Clara was quiet, then said, My father told me once that grief is love with nowhere to go, that the depth of grief measures the depth of love. Your wife was lucky to have been loved so completely. I was the lucky one, Eli said. You were both lucky. Clara touched his arm, a brief gesture of comfort. But Eli, she wouldn't want you to stop living because she couldn't, would she? No, he admitted. She'd be furious with me for hiding up in that cabin, Clara smiled. Then maybe it's time to honor her by living the kind of life she'd approve of. They walked back in companionable silence. But something had shifted between them, a deeper understanding, an intimacy of shared vulnerability. That night, Eli took Anne's photograph from his saddlebag where he'd been keeping it. He looked at her face for a long time, then carefully wrapped it and placed it at the bottom of his bag. Not forgotten, never forgotten, but no longer the only thing he carried. The next day brought complications. Marcus Dalton rode onto the property with 2 of his ranch hands, uninvited and unwelcome. Eli met them at the property line. This is private land, Dalton. You need permission to be here. Just being neighborly, Dalton said, his tone suggesting anything but. Wanted to see what you're building with all that Eastern money. You've seen it. Now you can leave. Dalton's eyes swept over the construction, the crew working together. His lip curled when he saw Miguel and Joseph. Got yourself quite the collection of misfits, Turner. The Mex, the Indian, the Chinaman's widow. Very progressive of you. I hire based on skill and character, Eli said evenly. You should try it sometime. Where's the lady boss? Dalton looked around. Or is she still in bed at this hour? Must be nice, having a man do all the real work while you... He didn't finish. Eli's hand was suddenly gripping his horse's bridle, his face close to Dalton's, his voice low and dangerous. You will not disrespect Mrs. Weston on her own property. You will not come here uninvited again. And if you have a problem with how we run this ranch, you can take it up with the Territorial Land Office, because we're operating completely within the law. Are we clear? Dalton jerked his horse's head back, anger and something like fear crossing his face. You're making enemies, Turner. People in this valley don't appreciate outsiders coming in and changing things. Then those people can learn to adapt, Eli said. Now get off this property before I have the sheriff escort you off. After Dalton left, Miguel approached Eli. He's going to make trouble, boss. Men like that don't let things go. I know, Eli said. Keep your eyes open. Let me know if you see anyone suspicious around the property. That evening, Sheriff Bradshaw rode out to the ranch. He found Eli and Clara reviewing building plans by lamplight in the nearly complete main house. Heard about Dalton's visit, Tom said without preamble. Wanted to make sure there wasn't any real trouble. Just talk, Eli said. For now, Tom nodded. I'll have a word with him. But you should know, he's been to the Water Rights Commission. Claims you're planning to divert more than your legal share from the creek. Clara looked up sharply. That's absurd. We haven't touched the creek except to water stock and construction. Everything's documented, I know. But Dalton's got friends on the commission. They could make things difficult even if you're in the right. Let them try, Clara said, steel in her voice. I have lawyers in Denver who specialize in water rights. If Dalton wants a legal fight, I can give him one. After Tom left, Clara paced the room, angry. This is exactly what happened in Philadelphia. Men who can't compete fairly try to use the system against you. You knew there'd be resistance, Eli said. Knowing it and experiencing it are different things. She stopped pacing and looked at Eli. Are you sorry that you took this job? That you got involved in all this? Eli thought about his cabin in the high country, the quiet isolation he'd chosen for 8 years. Then he thought about the past month, building something real, working with good people, feeling alive for the first time since Anne died. No, he said. I'm not sorry. Clara stepped closer. Neither am I. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. She reached out and squeezed his hand, a gesture that lasted a moment longer than strictly necessary. Eli felt the warmth of her palm against his, the calluses from hard work that matched his own. Their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them. Recognition, attraction, possibility. Eli pulled his hand back gently. We should get some rest. Early start tomorrow. Clara nodded, but her eyes held disappointment. Of course. Good night, Eli. Alone in his tent, Eli lay awake, his hand still warm where Clara had touched it. He was falling for her. Had been for weeks, if he was honest with himself, and it terrified him even as it exhilarated him, because Clara Weston wasn't just beautiful and intelligent and strong. She was alive in a way that made him want to be alive too. She made him remember what it felt like to look forward to tomorrow, to care about building something that would last. But caring meant risk. Caring meant vulnerability. Caring meant that when, not if, but when something went wrong, it would hurt just as much as losing Anne had hurt. Eli didn't know if he was strong enough to survive that again, but looking at the stars through his tent opening, feeling the ache of Clara's absence, he was starting to realize he might not have a choice. His heart had already decided, even if his head was still arguing. The water rights hearing was scheduled for early November in Helena, the territorial capital. Clara needed to file legal papers anyway, so she and Eli planned a 3-day trip. 1 day to ride there, a day for business, 1 day back. The crew could manage the ranch in their absence. The main house was nearly complete, and the November work was mostly finishing touches, hanging doors, installing windows, building furniture. They left on a Tuesday morning under clear skies, the mountains sharp against the horizon. It would be the longest time Eli and Clara had spent alone together since the ranch work began, and both felt the weight of that. For the first few hours, they kept conversation light and professional, discussing ranch operations, planning for winter, talking about the cattle they'd purchase in spring. But as the day wore on and the miles passed, the conversation deepened. Clara told Eli about her life in Philadelphia, the mansion she'd grown up in, the society parties she'd endured, the men who'd courted her wealth while ignoring her intelligence. She told him about her father, Robert Weston, who'd built a railroad empire from nothing and taught her that money was responsibility, not privilege. He died in March, she said quietly. Heart gave out while he was reviewing construction plans. He was 62, still working, still building, right to the end. I'm sorry, Eli said. He lived well, died doing what he loved. That's more than most people get. Clara was quiet for a moment. But his death freed me. That sounds terrible, doesn't it? But it's true. While he was alive, I had obligations. Managing his social life, entertaining business partners, being the proper daughter. After he died, I realized I could finally do what I'd always wanted. Build something of your own. Yes. She looked at him. What about you? What did you do before you came west? Eli hesitated, then told her. About growing up in Ohio. His father's hardware store, the expectation that he'd take over the family business. How he'd met Anne at church, how they'd married young, he was 22, she was 20, and built a modest life together. I worked in my father's store, he said. Did the books, managed inventory. It was good, steady work. Anne kept house, tended a garden. We were happy, simple but happy. What happened? After she died, my parents wanted me to stay. Thought work and family would heal me. But I couldn't stand being in that house without her, couldn't stand people's pity. So I sold everything, packed a wagon, and came west. Told myself I was starting over. Really, I was just running away. They made camp that evening by a stream, the air cold enough to see their breath. Eli built a fire while Clara unpacked their supplies. They'd fallen into an easy domestic rhythm that felt natural, comfortable. After dinner, sitting by the fire with coffee warming their hands, Clara said, "I want to tell you something about why I came to Montana. The real reason." Eli waited, sensing this was important. "My father had a cousin," Clara began, "a woman named Anne, who lived in Ohio. They weren't close. The families had drifted apart over the years. But when Anne got sick with fever 8 years ago, she reached out to my father. Asked for help." Eli went very still. "My father sent money for doctors," Clara continued. "The best physicians he could find. He even arranged transport to bring her to Philadelphia, where the hospitals were better. But she refused to leave her husband. Said she wanted to die at home with the man she loved." Eli's hands tightened around his coffee cup. Clara looked at him, her eyes reflecting firelight. "Anne's last name was Weston before she married. My father's cousin. Which means my Anne was related to you," Eli said, his voice strange in his own ears. "Yes." Clara reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a leather folder. "I found these among my father's papers after he died. Letters from Anne. I think you should read them." With shaking hands, Eli took the folder. Inside were letters in Anne's familiar handwriting, dated from 8 years ago. "Dear Cousin Robert," the first one read, "thank you for your generous offer of help. The doctors you sent were kind, but they confirmed what we already knew. The fever has progressed too far. I don't have much time." Eli's vision blurred with tears, but he kept reading. "I'm not afraid of dying, Robert. I've made my peace with God and with the life I've lived. But I am worried about Eli. He's a good man, the best man I've ever known, but he feels things deeply. Too deeply, perhaps. I fear what my death will do to him." The letter went on, describing Eli, his character, his grief, his tendency to withdraw when hurt. Anne had known him so well, had seen his weaknesses and loved him anyway. The next letter was dated a week later, written in shakier handwriting. "Robert, I'm asking you a favor. After I'm gone, please watch over Eli if you can. Not directly, his pride wouldn't allow it. But if you ever hear of him, if opportunity arises to help him, please do. He deserves happiness, deserves to live fully again. Promise me you'll try." The final letter was dated 3 days before Anne died. "My time is shorter than I thought. Eli doesn't know I'm writing these. He'd be angry at me for asking favors. But I need to say this to someone. I love him more than words can express. If there's any justice in the world, he'll find love again after I'm gone. Someone who sees his worth the way I do. Someone who won't let him hide from life. If you ever meet such a person, Robert, please give them a chance to know him. He's worth knowing." Eli set down the letters, unable to continue. Clara was crying too, tears running silently down her face. "My father kept his promise," she said softly. "He had investigators track you over the years. Not intrusively, just checking that you were alive, were managing. When he knew he was dying, he called me to his study, gave me these letters, told me about Anne's request." She took a deep breath. "He said, 'I want you to make your own choices, Clara, always. But if you ever find yourself in Montana and you happen to meet a man named Eli Turner, I hope you'll give him the chance Anne asked for. Not because you owe me or her anything, but because he's the kind of man worth knowing." Eli felt like the ground had shifted beneath him. The ranch. The job offer. All of it. Was it just to fulfill a promise to a dying woman? "No!" Clara moved closer, urgent. "Eli, listen to me. I read Anne's letters before I came west. I knew your name, knew your general location. But when I got off that stage in Copper Creek, I had no idea which person you were. I was planning to find you eventually, introduce myself, perhaps offer help if you needed it. But then you helped me in that street," she continued. "You helped a stranger for no reason except it was right. I didn't know it was you until later, when Mrs. Henley mentioned your name. And by then," she stopped, searching for words. "By then what?" Eli asked. "By then I was already drawn to you. Already saw the man Anne described. Decent, strong, worthy of respect. The job offer wasn't charity, Eli. I genuinely needed a foreman I could trust. And you were perfect for it." Eli stood, paced away from the fire. His mind was reeling. Everything he'd believed about how they'd met, why Clara had chosen him, it was all reframed by this revelation. "How do I know?" he asked, his back to her. "How do I know you didn't just see me as a project? Some man your father wanted you to help, so you manufactured a reason to, because I'm falling in love with you, you stubborn man." Clara's voice cracked with emotion. "I didn't plan that. I didn't expect it. But working beside you every day, seeing your integrity and strength and kindness, how could I not?" Eli turned, stunned. Clara stood, her face fierce and vulnerable at once. "I know this is complicated. I know the connection to Anne makes everything strange. But my feelings for you are real, Eli. They're not obligation or pity or some deathbed promise. They're real. I don't know what to think," Eli said honestly. It's too much, too strange. Anne asking your father to watch over me, your father telling you about me, all of it leading to us meeting in a muddy street," Clara finished. "To you helping me without knowing any of this? Maybe it was fate, Eli. Maybe Anne and my father are looking down and smiling because they brought us together. Or maybe it's just coincidence. Does it matter?" "It matters to me," Eli's voice rose. "Because I need to know, would you have looked at me twice if not for those letters? Would you have chosen me as foreman if your father hadn't asked you to help me?" "I don't know," Clara admitted. "I can't answer that because I did read the letters, and I did know your name. But I can tell you this, when I offered you that job, it was because you helped me in the street, because I saw your character before I knew your identity. That has to count for something." "But you knew," Eli said. "All this time you knew about Anne, about the connection, and you didn't tell me." "I know. I'm sorry. I wanted to tell you so many times, but I didn't know how. And the longer I waited, the harder it became." They stood on opposite sides of the fire, the distance between them suddenly feeling vast. "I need time," Eli said finally. "I need to think about this," Clara nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand." That night they slept on opposite sides of the camp, the fire dying between them. Eli lay awake, staring at stars that offered no answers. He thought about Anne, about her love being so deep that even in death she'd tried to care for him. He thought about Clara, about her father honoring a dying woman's wish. He thought about coincidence and fate, and whether the distinction even mattered. And he thought about his own feelings, undeniable, growing stronger every day, for a woman who'd been connected to him in ways he'd never imagined. By dawn, he'd reached no conclusions, only questions, doubt, and a heart that ached with too many emotions to name. They rode to Helena in near silence, the previous night's revelation hanging between them like fog. Clara didn't push for conversation, and Eli was grateful for that. He needed time to process, to sort through the tangle of emotions, anger, confusion, grief, and underneath it all, feelings for Clara that wouldn't be denied, no matter how complicated the circumstances. Helena was larger than Copper Creek, a real city with brick buildings, paved streets, and the bustle of territorial commerce. The territorial offices were housed in an imposing stone structure that spoke of government permanence. They checked into a modest hotel, separate rooms, proper propriety, and prepared for the next day's business. That evening, Eli walked the streets alone, trying to clear his head. He found himself at a small church, its doors open despite the late hour. He went inside, sat in a back pew, and looked at the simple altar. "I don't know what to do," he said quietly, speaking to God or Anne or whoever might be listening. "I'm angry she didn't tell me, but I understand why she didn't. I care about her, more than I wanted to, more than is probably wise. But how do I separate what's real from what's obligation? How do I know if I'm honoring your memory or betraying it?" The church offered no answers, but the silence was comforting nonetheless. When he returned to the hotel, he found Clara in the lobby, reading by lamplight. She looked up as he entered, hope and fear mingling in her expression. "Can we talk?" Eli asked. They went to the small dining room, ordered coffee, and sat across from each other at a corner table. "I've been thinking," Eli began, "about Anne, about what she wrote to your father, about why you came here." Clara waited, her hands wrapped around her coffee cup. Anne was right about me, Eli continued. After she died, I did withdraw. I stopped living and just started existing. 8 years I spent in that cabin, going through the motions, keeping everyone at arm's length. He looked at Clara directly. Until you. Eli, let me finish. He took a breath. You came to Montana for your own reasons. To build something, to escape Philadelphia, to start fresh. The fact that your father asked you to watch for me, that Anne hoped someone might pull me back to life, that's not manipulation. That's love trying to reach across death to help someone. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I'm not angry anymore, Eli said.
I'm grateful.
Grateful that Anne loved me enough to worry about my future. Grateful that your father honored her request. Grateful that you, his voice caught. Grateful that you gave me a chance to live again. I should have told you sooner, Clara said. That was wrong of me. Maybe, but I understand why you didn't. It was complicated. It still is. He reached across the table, took her hand. But complicated doesn't mean wrong. It just means we have to be honest with each other from now on. Clara gripped his hand like a lifeline. I meant what I said last night. My feelings for you are real. They're not about promises or obligations. They're about who you are. I know, Eli said. And my feelings for you are real too. That scares me. I lost one person I loved, and the idea of risking that pain again terrifies me. But being without you scares me more. They sat holding hands across the table, both crying a little, both relieved. So what do we do now? Clara asked. We go forward, Eli said. Honestly, together. We build that ranch. We honor both Anne and your father by living the kind of life they'd be proud of. And we see where this takes us. Clara smiled through her tears. I'd like that. The next morning they met with Eli's brother Samuel Turner at his office. Eli hadn't seen Samuel in 8 years. They'd parted on bad terms when Eli left Ohio, and the reunion was awkward. Samuel was 5 years older than Eli, successful and established. He'd become a territorial judge, married well, had 3 children. Looking at him was like seeing an alternate version of Eli's life, the one where grief hadn't derailed everything. So this is the woman who finally got you out of the mountains, Samuel said, studying Clara with judicial assessment. This is Clara Weston, Eli said, my employer and my friend, and possibly more than that, if I'm reading the situation correctly, Samuel observed. Eli didn't deny it. We're here about a water rights challenge. Marcus Dalton. I know Dalton, Samuel interrupted. Familiar with his reputation. Not a man I'd want as an enemy. They spent 2 hours reviewing Clara's legal position. Samuel examined her purchase documents, water rights allocations, and survey reports. His conclusion was straightforward. You're completely within your legal rights, he said. Dalton doesn't have a case, but he has friends on the Water Commission, and they could make things difficult procedurally, even if they can't win legally. What do you recommend? Clara asked. File a formal complaint with my court. I'll review it, and if, when I rule in your favor, that supersedes the commission. It'll take a few weeks, but it's the surest path. After the meeting, Samuel asked to speak with Eli privately. They walked to a nearby cafe, ordered coffee, and sat in uncomfortable silence for a moment. I owe you an apology, Samuel said finally. When you left Ohio, I said some harsh things. About you running away, about dishonoring Anne's memory by giving up. I was wrong. Eli was surprised. Samuel rarely admitted being wrong about anything. You weren't entirely wrong, Eli said. I was running away, and I did give up in a way. But you're not running now, Samuel observed. This woman, Clara, she's brought you back to life. I can see it in you. You're different, better. She is remarkable, Eli admitted. Does she know about your education? That you're not just some mountain man, that you studied at university, that you could have been anything. And it hasn't come up. Maybe it should. Samuel leaned forward. Look, I know we're not close anymore. That's my fault as much as yours. But I'm glad you found someone, Eli. Anne would be glad too. I know she would, Eli said quietly. Clara's father, it's complicated, but Anne actually knew him. Asked him to watch over me after she died. He's the one who told Clara about me. Samuel's eyebrows rose. That's, I know, strange. Maybe fate, maybe coincidence. But it brought us together, and I'm grateful for that. They parted with a handshake that felt like tentative reconciliation. Perhaps, Eli thought, he was rebuilding more than just a ranch. Perhaps he was rebuilding his entire life. That evening, as Eli and Clara prepared to leave Helena, a telegram arrived at their hotel. It was from Miguel, and it contained only 3 words: "Come home, trouble." They rode through the night, pushing the horses as hard as they dared. Fear gnawed at Eli's gut. What kind of trouble? Had Dalton escalated? Was someone hurt? They arrived at the ranch near dawn, exhausted and anxious. What they found made Eli's blood run cold. The nearly complete main house had been vandalized. Windows smashed, doors torn from hinges, obscenities painted on the walls. The bunkhouse had been ransacked. Tools were scattered and broken. Supplies had been dumped and ruined. The crew stood in the wreckage, Miguel's face bruised, Joseph's arm in a makeshift sling. "What happened?" Eli demanded. "They came 2 nights ago," Miguel said. 6 men, maybe 7. Wore masks, but I recognized Dalton's voice. They said this ranch was an insult to decent people. Said we had no business here. We tried to stop them, Tommy added, his young face showing anger and shame. But they had guns. Told us if we interfered, they'd burn everything. Clara walked through the destruction, her face pale but composed. "Anyone seriously hurt?" "Joseph's arm might be broke," Sarah said. "Everything else is bruises and cuts." Eli felt rage building in his chest. Hot, dangerous, barely controlled. This was more than vandalism. This was a message. Dalton was declaring war. "We're going to the sheriff," Clara said firmly. "This is criminal destruction of property and assault." "Won't matter," Miguel said bitterly. "Sheriff can't prove who did it. Dalton has witnesses saying he was at home that night. And even if he arrests anyone, they'll just get fined. Men like Dalton don't face real consequences. Then what do we do?" Tommy asked. "Let them get away with it." Eli looked at the destruction, at his injured crew, at Clara's determined face. He thought about 8 years of hiding, of avoiding conflict, of letting fear control his choices. "No more. We rebuild," he said quietly. "We rebuild and we make it stronger. We post guards at night. We document everything. And we send word to Sheriff Bradshaw and to Samuel Turner. Maybe Dalton thinks he can intimidate us into leaving. But he's wrong. They could come back," Joseph said. "Could be worse next time." "Let them come," Eli said, and there was steel in his voice. "We're not going anywhere." Clara stepped beside him, and together they faced the crew. "We'll pay for all repairs," she said. "Anyone who wants to leave, I understand. But anyone who stays will have a bonus at the end of this. We take care of our own." The crew exchanged glances. Then one by one they nodded. "We stay," Miguel said. "This is our home now, too." They spent that day cleaning up, making lists of damages, starting repairs. Sheriff Bradshaw rode out, took statements, promised to investigate. But everyone knew it would lead nowhere. That night, with guards posted and the crew sleeping in shifts, Eli and Clara stood in what remained of the main house, looking at the wreckage. "I'm sorry," Clara said. "This is my fault. If I hadn't been so aggressive about challenging Dalton—" "This isn't your fault," Eli interrupted. "This is about men who can't handle change, who think violence solves problems. We didn't start this fight, but we're going to finish it. How? By not giving up. By building something so successful that Dalton's hatred doesn't matter. By proving that decency and fairness can triumph over bullying and intimidation." Clara leaned against him, and Eli put his arm around her shoulders. They stood that way for a long time, drawing strength from each other. "We're in this together," Clara said. "Together," Eli agreed. What neither of them knew was that Dalton's vandalism was just the beginning. The real confrontation was still ahead. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of winter morning that made everything sharp-edged and vivid. The crisis had passed, but its aftermath lingered in the exhausted faces of the crew, in the adrenaline-driven relief that made everything seem both too real and slightly unreal. Eli stood outside the main house, watching the sun rise over the mountains. He'd been awake all night, too wired to sleep, too aware of how close they'd come to disaster. Clara found him there, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She handed him one wordlessly, and they stood together in companionable silence, watching the light paint the snow-covered peaks gold and pink. I was terrified, Clara said finally. When I saw those riders coming down the ridge, I thought I was going to lose everything. The ranch, the crew, her voice broke. You, Eli turned to look at her. In the morning light, she looked tired but beautiful, strong but vulnerable. Everything he'd come to love about her. You could have been killed, Clara continued. If Sheriff Bradshaw hadn't arrived when he did, if shooting had started, she set down her coffee cup and covered her face with her hands. I brought you into this, put you in danger. All because I wanted to prove something, to build something. Stop. Eli took her hands, pulled them gently from her face. You didn't bring me into anything. I chose this. Chose to accept your offer, chose to stay when things got difficult, chose to stand with you last night. Those were my decisions, but Clara, listen to me. He held both her hands, looking directly into her eyes. 8 years ago, I stopped living. I was so afraid of being hurt again that I chose to feel nothing at all. I told myself I was content, that solitude was what I wanted. But I was lying. I was just hiding. Clara was crying now, silent tears running down her face. You changed that, Eli continued. From that first moment in the muddy street, you changed everything. You reminded me that life is meant to be lived, that taking risks is part of being alive, that love, he paused, taking a breath, that love is worth the possibility of loss. Eli, I love you, he said simply. I think I started falling for you that day in the street. Definitely by the time we started building this ranch together. And last night, standing there facing Dalton, all I could think was how grateful I am that you came into my life. How grateful I am that I get to stand beside you, building something real. Clara was sobbing now, relief and joy and exhaustion all mixing together. I love you too. I have for weeks, maybe months. But I was afraid you'd think it was just because of Anne's letters, because of my father's request. I don't care about the letters anymore, Eli said. I don't care how we met or what circumstances brought us together. All I care about is this, you and me, right now, choosing each other. He pulled her close, and she buried her face in his shoulder. They stood that way for a long time, holding each other as the sun rose higher and the world woke around them. When they finally pulled apart, Eli reached into his pocket and withdrew something small, a simple gold band, worn smooth with age and time. This was Anne's wedding ring, he said quietly. I've carried it for 8 years, couldn't bear to let it go. But I think it's time. He walked to the edge of the property, where the creek ran clear and cold. Clara followed, understanding without words what he was about to do. Eli looked at the ring one last time, remembering Anne, remembering their love, feeling gratitude instead of grief. Thank you, he said softly, speaking to memory, to the past, to the woman who'd loved him completely. Thank you for everything, for loving me, for asking your cousin to watch over me, for wanting me to find happiness again. I'll never forget you, but I'm ready now, ready to move forward. He dropped the ring into the creek. It flashed once in the sunlight, then was gone, carried away by the current. Clara took his hand, and they stood together watching the water flow. She'd be happy for you, Clara said. For us, I know, Eli said. I think she would be. They walked back to the main house hand in hand, and when they reached the porch, Eli turned to Clara and kissed her, properly, deeply, holding nothing back. She kissed him back with equal fervor, both of them pouring months of restrained feelings into that single moment. When they broke apart, breathless and smiling, they found the entire crew standing in the yard, grinning and applauding. About time, Miguel called out. We've been waiting for you two to figure it out. Took you long enough, Sarah added with a knowing smile. Eli felt his face heat with embarrassment. But Clara just laughed, full and free and joyful. All right, she said, addressing the crew with mock sternness. Show's over. We've got a ranch to run, but tonight we celebrate. Zara, can you make something special for dinner? Already planning it, Sarah said. As the crew dispersed to their various tasks, Eli and Clara remained on the porch, arms around each other, looking out at the ranch they'd built together. What happens now? Clara asked. Eli smiled. Now we live. We build, we love. We take each day as it comes. Sounds perfect, Clara said, and for the first time in 8 years, Eli Turner believed that it truly was. Spring came to Montana with its usual drama, snowmelt swelling the creeks, wildflowers carpeting the meadows, the mountains shedding their white mantles to reveal green slopes beneath. The ranch, which they'd officially named the Weston Turner Ranch, thrived under the careful management of Eli and Clara. The cattle had wintered well. New calves arrived daily, filling the corrals with life and promise. The crew had grown to 12 people, all carefully chosen for character and skill, all treated fairly and paid well. Word had spread about the Weston Turner Ranch, about the unusual partnership between its owners, about the diverse crew, about the way things were run, with integrity and respect. Other ranchers started following their example. Not all of them, not even most, but enough to matter. Miguel was no longer the only Mexican vaquero working in the valley. Joseph's expertise in land management was sought after by neighboring operations. Sarah's cafe in town was thriving, though she still cooked special meals at the ranch twice a week. Marcus Dalton had been sentenced to 2 years in territorial prison for his crimes, plus substantial fines and restitution. His ranch, which he'd run into debt with his obsession about destroying Clara and Eli, had been sold at auction. Some of his former workers found employment at the Weston Turner Ranch, where they discovered that fair treatment made for better working conditions than intimidation ever had. Sheriff Tom Bradshaw had been re-elected in a landslide, his handling of the Dalton situation cementing his reputation as a lawman who protected everyone equally, regardless of their social standing or connections. Mrs. Henley's general store had expanded, fueled by the prosperity the ranch brought to Copper Creek. She'd hired 2 assistants and was considering opening a second location. The town itself had changed. Not dramatically, not overnight, but gradually and undeniably. The same people who'd mocked Clara in the muddy street now greeted her respectfully. The same folks who'd questioned Eli's judgment now asked his advice. Progress, it turned out, came not through grand gestures, but through consistent integrity. On a warm May afternoon, Eli and Clara stood on the porch of their completed home, a beautiful structure of local timber and stone, with large windows that let in light and views of the mountains. Inside was comfortable furniture, books on shelves, photographs on walls. It was a home built for living, for family, for a future. "I have something to tell you," Clara said. Taking Eli's hand, he turned to look at her, noting the particular brightness in her eyes, the barely suppressed smile. "I'm pregnant," she said simply. "About 3 months along. The doctor in Helena confirmed it last week." Eli felt the words hit him like a physical force. For a moment he couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. Then he was laughing and crying at once, pulling Clara into his arms, holding her as if she might disappear if he let go. "Are you happy?" Clara asked, though she could feel the answer in his embrace. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Eli managed. Terrified and overjoyed and grateful all at once, they held each other on the porch, both thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From a muddy street to this moment, from 2 wounded people hiding from life to 2 people fully alive and facing the future together. "We should tell the crew," Clara said eventually. "They'll want to know." That evening, they gathered everyone together. When Eli and Clara announced the pregnancy, the crew erupted in celebration. Sarah immediately began planning special meals for Clara. Miguel started designing a cradle. Joseph began crafting a mobile from wood and leather, traditional Salish patterns that would teach the child about the land's first people. Tommy, now 20 and one of the ranch's most reliable hands, offered to build an addition onto the house, a nursery with windows facing the mountains. "This baby," Miguel said, raising a glass in toast, "will have the strangest, most wonderful family in Montana territory." "The best kind of family," Clara corrected. "The kind we choose, not just the kind we're born into." Later that night, after the celebration had wound down and the crew had retired, Eli and Clara sat together in the parlor of their home. A fire crackled in the hearth, though the evening was warm enough not to need it. "Some traditions were worth keeping. Do you ever think about that day?" Clara asked. The muddy street. Often, Eli admitted. I think about how close I came to just riding past, minding my own business like I always did. What would have happened if I had? You wouldn't have, Clara said with certainty. That's not who you are. You saw someone who needed help, and you helped. Simple as that. Nothing about us has been simple, Eli said with a smile. No, Clara agreed. But that's what makes it good. The complications, the challenges, the way we had to fight for this. It makes it mean something. She leaned against him, and Eli put his arm around her shoulders, his hand resting gently on her stomach where their child grew. I used to think, Eli said quietly, that I'd used up my chance at happiness, that Anne was my one shot at love, and after I lost her, that was it. No second chances. And now I know that life is more generous than that. Anne was my first love, and I'll always honor what we had. But you're my second chance, and you're just as real, just as true, just as meant to be. Clara turned her face up to his, and they kissed, gentle, familiar, full of promise. Outside, the ranch settled into evening quiet. The cattle were bedded down, the horses drowsing in the barn, the crew sleeping in comfortable bunks. The mountains stood sentinel under stars that had witnessed countless human dramas and would witness countless more. But in that moment, in that home, two people who'd found each other through an act of simple kindness were building a future together. A future with children and cattle, with a crew that was family, with a ranch that represented everything they'd fought for and believed in. In Copper Creek, they still told the story, not as gossip anymore, but as something else. A reminder that character mattered, that kindness had consequences, that the truest wealth wasn't counted in gold or acres, but in love and integrity and the courage to build something real. Sometimes, the old-timers would say, the best things in life come from helping a stranger on a muddy street, and everyone who heard the story of Eli Turner and Clara Weston knew it to be true. The future stretched before them, full of uncertainty and promise in equal measure. There would be challenges ahead. Ranching was never easy, Montana winters were harsh, and raising a child required courage and wisdom, but they would face it together. These two people who'd been broken and had chosen to heal, who'd been alone and had chosen to connect, who'd been afraid and had chosen love anyway. The story of Copper Creek's unlikely couple was still being written. But as Eli and Clara sat together in their home, watching the fire and feeling their child move beneath Clara's heart, they knew that whatever chapters lay ahead, they would write them together, and that was enough. More than enough. That was everything.